Welcome back to the channel. Before we begin tonight's chilling story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new horror tale. And I have a question for you. What city are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? Leave your answer in the comments below. I read your comments with great excitement, and I love seeing where everyone is watching from around the world. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin tonight's terrifying story. The kitchen radio crackled before I even found the light switch. I was 28, working a seasonal trail crew in north central Washington, and I was staying alone in a retired fire lookout's house outside Twisp for 3 weeks. My lease had ended, the next place wasn't ready yet, and this old lookout named Kay let me stay in her little house while she visited her daughter in Spokane. It was cheaper than a motel, and I told everyone I liked quiet anyway. I had just come in from work, still dirty, still smelling like sawdust and sweat, heating up canned soup at the stove. The house was small, one floor with wood walls, a mudroom, and an old fire service radio sitting on a shelf above the phone jack. Kay said it didn't transmit anymore. It just picked up weather and random forestry traffic. Then it clicked on by itself. Static came first. Then a man's voice said, "Evan Porch Light." My name is Evan. I stood there holding the soup can, staring at the radio like an idiot. The voice didn't sound clear. It sounded far away and cheap, like someone talking through a towel. I thought maybe it was a dispatcher or somebody on a crew who knew I was staying there. People in small towns know things. My name had been on the crew schedule. My truck had the county sticker. It wasn't impossible. The porch light was on. I had turned it on when I left that morning. I walked to the front window and looked out. The porch was empty. The road past the house was dark except for one yellow street lamp near the mailboxes. Pines moved in the wind behind the fence. The radio crackled again. Still there? I reached up and turned the volume down, not off. I don't know why. Maybe because hearing it felt safer than silence. Kay had warned me the house made noise. Branches hit the roof. The water heater clicked. Deer came through the yard. She said not to let it get into my head. I was lonely enough already. My girlfriend had left me 2 months earlier, and I had been pretending I was fine by taking every shift they gave me. Staying in that house felt like proof that I could handle being by myself. So when a strange voice came through the radio, I did what tired people do. I made it normal. I ate standing at the counter. I checked my phone. 1 bar. No messages. At about 9:20, the radio made a short burst of static. Then a different sound came through. Not a voice this time. More like breathing near a microphone. Then 2 clicks. I walked over and turned the knob until the radio went quiet. That made the house too quiet. A few minutes later, something tapped against the back window. Not a hard knock. Just tap, tap, tap. I didn't move right away. The back of the house faced the tree line. Kay had wind chimes out there, and there was a loose screen over the kitchen window. I kept thinking, it's the screen. It's a branch. It's a moth. Then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and shined it through the window. The beam hit the screen, the little herb garden, the wood pile, and the dark line of trees past the yard. Nothing. But the rake that had been leaning against the shed was lying flat under the window. I remembered stepping over it when I came home, so I knew it hadn't been there before. I called my crew lead, Mason. No answer. Then I called Kay. It rang until voicemail. I didn't want to call 911 because of a radio and a rake. That sounds stupid now, but at the time I kept hearing my own voice trying to explain it. Hi, someone moved a rake. I locked the back door, then the front. I checked the windows. The bathroom window didn't latch right, so I shoved a hand towel into the track. I felt better after that for maybe 30 seconds. Then the radio came back on. I had turned it off. The knob was still clicked off. The speaker popped once. Then the same man said, clearer this time, "You missed the mudroom." I looked toward the mudroom door. It was at the end of a short hall off the kitchen. It had a small window at eye level, covered by a curtain. Beyond it was the little enclosed porch where Kay kept boots and firewood. I had come through there when I got home. I walked toward it slowly. My socks made no sound on the old floor. Before I touched the handle, the curtain on the other side of the mudroom window moved. Not from wind. It lifted just a little, like someone had pinched the bottom of it. I backed away so fast I hit the kitchen table. A voice, not from the radio, came from the other side of the door. "Evan." It was soft, almost polite. I didn't answer. The handle turned once. The deadbolt held. The voice said, "Kay said you might help me." I knew Kay had no son, no nephew nearby. She had told me too many stories about her family while showing me where the towels were. I grabbed my phone and called 911. The call failed twice before it connected. I whispered my address as best I could. The dispatcher asked if I was in immediate danger, and I said someone was trying to get into the house. While I was talking, the mudroom handle turned again. Then the radio popped. "Tell them it's a mistake," the man said through the speaker. I stopped breathing for a second. The dispatcher asked me what I heard. I told her the person outside had a radio. The man at the mudroom door tapped on the glass with one fingernail. "Open up for a second," he said. "It's cold." His voice was calm, and that was worse. He didn't sound drunk. He didn't sound angry. He sounded like someone who had time. The dispatcher told me to get into a room with a locking door. The only rooms with real doors were the bedroom and bathroom. The bedroom had 2 windows facing the yard. The bathroom window was tiny, but it opened toward the side of the house, away from the mudroom. I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I kept the phone pressed to my ear and sat on the closed toilet lid with my feet up, like a kid. For about a minute, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps move across the mudroom porch. Slow, heavy, not hiding anymore. The front porch boards creaked next. Whoever it was had walked around the house. The dispatcher kept asking questions, but I barely answered. I heard the front doorknob move. Then a hard push. The doorframe gave a little pop, but it held. The radio in the kitchen stayed on. Static filled the hallway. Then the man's voice came through again. "He's in the bathroom." I stared at the tiny window. The towel I had shoved into the track was still there. But outside, something scraped against the siding below it. I got off the toilet and stood on the edge of the tub. The bathroom window was high, and it opened outward. I pulled the towel free and pushed the window open just enough to look. A hand came up outside and grabbed the sill. I slammed the window down on the fingers. The hand disappeared. A man hissed, not loud, just through his teeth. The dispatcher heard me yell and told me deputies were coming, but the nearest unit was not close. I don't remember the exact distance. I just remember understanding that nobody was about to kick the door open and save me. That was when I remembered Kay's note on the fridge. If radio works, Channel 6 reaches Winthrop VFD sometimes. I didn't know if it was true. I didn't even know if the microphone worked. But the radio was in the kitchen, and the person outside thought I was trapped in the bathroom. I opened the bathroom door and crawled low down the hall. My knees hurt on the floorboards. The house smelled like cold soup and dust. At the kitchen shelf, I grabbed the radio mic. My hand was shaking so badly I hit the side of the shelf with my knuckles. I pressed the button. "This is Evan Harper at Kay Whitcomb's house on Pine Cut Road," I said. "There's a man trying to enter the house. I need help." Static. Then I remembered the emergency codes from the fire crew, not because I was smart, but because Mason drilled them into us. I pressed the button again. "Emergency traffic. Pine Cut Road. Unknown male at residence. Request immediate assistance." For a few seconds, nothing. Then a woman's voice answered. "Station 2 copy. Stay inside. Repeat your location." The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the plates. I dropped the mic and ran toward the bathroom again, but halfway there I saw the mudroom door move inward. Not open, just bend, because the wood around the latch was splitting. I changed direction without thinking. Kay had an old pantry off the kitchen, barely bigger than a closet, with shelves on both sides and a sliding bolt on the inside. I got in and shut it. I slid the bolt as quietly as I could. The mudroom door broke open. Not like in movies. It didn't explode. It gave a sharp crack, and then the cold came in. Footsteps crossed the kitchen. I held my phone against my chest so the dispatcher wouldn't hear me breathing. The pantry smelled like flour and mouse traps. A man walked right past the door. I saw him through the thin gap near the frame. Dark pants, work boots, a gray coat, one hand down by his side holding a handheld radio with a little green light. He stood in the kitchen and listened. The fire station siren started in town. It was faint, but it carried through the valley. A long rising sound. The man turned his head toward it. Then he walked to the shelf, picked up the radio mic, and clicked it twice. No words. He moved fast after that, out through the mudroom, across the porch, down the steps. I stayed in the pantry until I heard tires on gravel and men shouting outside. It was not the deputies at first. It was 2 volunteer firefighters in a pickup and 1 older captain in his personal truck. They had heard the radio call and knew Kay's house. One of them opened the pantry after I shouted my name. The deputies got there later. They searched the tree line and the road, but whoever it was had gone. They found fresh scrape marks under the bathroom window. They found boot prints in the wet dirt behind the shed. They found a cheap handheld radio in the drainage ditch the next morning, set to the same channel as Kay's old unit. It had been stolen from a fire cache building that had been broken into a week earlier. What bothered the deputy most was the mudroom. The person had stacked 2 split logs neatly under the window before I got home. Not random. Like a step. He had been around the house before the radio ever spoke. Kay came home early when she heard. She cried when she saw the broken door, and I felt bad, even though none of it was my fault. I left 2 days later and slept on Mason's couch until my apartment was ready. I also quit taking every remote assignment just to prove something to myself. For a while after, any static sound made me freeze. Drive-through speakers, walkie-talkies at stores, weather radios in hardware aisles. The worst part wasn't that he knew my name. It was that he used loneliness like another unlocked door. Story 2. I was setting out trash cans in a neighborhood I didn't live in when a woman across the street called me by the homeowner's name. This happened in Decatur, Georgia, 2 summers ago. I was 28, working as a speech therapist at a middle school, and I was house-sitting for my assistant principal's mother, Mrs. Harper. Mrs. Harper had fallen and broken her hip, and her daughter asked if I could stay at the house for 10 days, water the plants, bring in the mail, and keep the place from looking empty. I had just moved to Georgia that year. I didn't have many friends yet. I was also trying very hard to be the kind of person people could count on, because my first year at that school had been rough. So when my assistant principal asked, I said yes right away. The house was a 1-story brick place at the end of a quiet street. Not fancy, but neat. Hydrangeas under the front window. Wind chimes on the porch. A little white bench near the door. It looked like every retired teacher's house I'd ever seen. On the second evening, I dragged the trash cans to the curb around 7. I had my hair still wet from a shower and 1 sandal half sliding off my foot. I was in a rush because I had brought grading work home with me. A woman was standing across the street near a mailbox. She was maybe in her late 40s, with short blonde hair and a navy fleece vest, even though it was warm out. She looked normal enough. She smiled and said, "Evening, Evelyn." Evelyn was Mrs. Harper's first name. I said, "Oh, I'm not Evelyn. I'm just staying here for her." The woman's smile didn't go away. She looked at the trash cans and then at me. "She still has someone doing Tuesdays for her?" she asked. I thought she meant the trash, so I said, "I guess so. I'm just helping while she's recovering." The woman nodded slowly. "Hip surgery, right?" That made sense. Mrs. Harper had lived there for years. People probably knew her business. Older neighborhoods are like that. I said, "Yeah. She's okay though." The woman stepped into the street a little, but didn't cross all the way. "Did she leave you the porch light timer? Sometimes it sticks." I looked back at the house. "I think it's automatic," I said. She nodded again and said, "Good. You don't want it dark back there." I didn't like how she said back there. Not because it was threatening, just because it was too familiar. Like she knew the house better than I did. I gave a small laugh and said, "Thanks," then went inside. For the next hour, I told myself she was probably a neighbor. Mrs. Harper had notes taped to the fridge for everything, and one of them said, "Trash Tuesday. Mail every day. Porch light stays on." So maybe people had helped her before. Maybe that woman had been one of them. Around 9, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop when I heard a scrape from outside. Not a crash. Not a footstep. More like plastic dragging on concrete. I froze for a second, then got up and looked through the side window by the kitchen. The trash cans were no longer at the curb. One of them had been pulled halfway up the driveway and turned sideways. I opened the door a crack and called, "Hello?" Nothing. The street was quiet. No one was outside. The porch light was on. The kitchen light made a reflection in the glass, so I could mostly see myself staring back. I almost went out to move the can, but something about the stillness stopped me. I shut the door and locked it. A minute later, my phone buzzed. It was my assistant principal. She wrote, "Mom says don't worry about the trash. City sometimes moves them around." I stared at that message for a while. I hadn't texted her about the trash. I typed back, "Did she just tell you that?" A few seconds passed. "No, sorry, I meant if you notice anything weird. She reminded me earlier." That made me feel a little better, but not much. The next morning, I found a paper grocery bag sitting on the front bench. Inside was a jar of peach preserves and a folded note. The note said, "For Evelyn. Hope the new girl is helping." No name. I stood there holding that paper for a long time. It could have been sweet. Someone was bringing food for an injured neighbor. But new girl bothered me. I hadn't met anyone besides the woman in the fleece vest. I also hadn't told her my age, job, or anything about myself. I brought the bag inside and took a picture of it. Then I called Mrs. Harper. Her voice sounded tired but sharp. She asked how the house was, and I said everything was fine. Then I asked if she had a neighbor with short blonde hair. She said, "Which house?" I said, "I'm not sure." She was by the mailbox across the street. Mrs. Harper was quiet for a second. "The blue house?" "I think so. No one lives there right now," she said. "They're renovating it. Nobody has moved in." I looked out the front window. The blue house sat across the street with paper taped inside the windows and a dumpster in the driveway. Mrs. Harper asked, "What did she want?" I said, "Nothing. She just knew your name." Mrs. Harper didn't panic. That almost made it worse. She just said, "Keep the doors locked, honey. Don't answer for anyone." I didn't tell her about the note because I didn't want to stress her out. That was stupid in hindsight, but it didn't feel stupid then. She was in rehab, and I didn't want to sound dramatic over jam. That afternoon after work, I checked the mail. There were 2 letters for Mrs. Harper and 1 postcard addressed to current resident. I brought them in and put them on the counter. The postcard was for a roofing company. Nothing special. But later, when I came back from the bathroom, the postcard was on the floor near the back door. At first I thought the ceiling fan had blown it off the counter. Then I noticed the mail slot in the back door. It was pushed inward. I had not noticed there was a mail slot there. It was low, painted the same white as the door, and had a little flap. Someone could have pushed something through it. Someone could have also pushed the postcard off the counter from outside with a thin stick or wire. I stood there listening. There was no sound. I locked the deadbolt, then locked the little chain latch above it, then dragged one of the kitchen chairs under the knob. I felt ridiculous doing it. I kept thinking, I am a grown woman barricading a kitchen door because a postcard fell. At about 8:30, I got another sound. 3 soft taps. Not at the front door. At the back door. They were slow. Tap, tap, tap. I did not move. A woman's voice said, "Evelyn?" It was the woman from the street. I stood in the hallway between the kitchen and living room, holding my phone in both hands. She waited. Then she said, "I know you're not her. I just need to talk to you for a second." I didn't answer. The doorknob moved once. Not hard. Just a careful little test. She said, "The light is out by the shed." There was no shed. Mrs. Harper had a little storage box for gardening tools, but no shed. I backed into the living room. My phone felt slippery in my hand. Then a man's voice said, lower and closer to the door, "She's in there." That was the first time I really understood this was not a misunderstanding. The woman said, "Open the door, please. We're not trying to scare you." The man said something I couldn't hear. Then the chair under the knob shifted. Not much. Just enough to scrape the tile. I ran down the hall into the front bedroom and closed the door without slamming it. The bedroom had one window facing the front yard. I looked out and saw the street empty, except for the blue house sitting dark across from me. I called 911, but I whispered so low the operator had to ask me to repeat the address. I didn't know it by heart. I had to crawl to my purse and pull out a piece of mail with shaking hands. While I was doing that, I heard the back door chain rattle. The operator told me to stay on the line and get somewhere safe. I almost hid in the closet, but then I heard the woman say, "Go around." The front door was only about 20 feet from the bedroom. If I stayed where I was and the man came around front, I'd be trapped in a room with one window that probably stuck shut. I opened the bedroom window anyway and pushed. It barely moved. Old paint. I pushed harder, and it gave with a loud crack. I thought for sure they heard it. The operator asked, "What was that?" I whispered, "Window." The front porch boards creaked. Someone was walking up to the front door. I pushed the screen out and climbed through. I landed in the flower bed, scraped my shin on the brick, and ran barefoot across the yard. I didn't run to a neighbor's door because I didn't know who lived where, and the blue house had already taught me not to assume. I ran to the main road at the end of the street where there was a small pharmacy with bright lights. I kept the operator on the phone the whole time. I remember the automatic doors opening and a cashier saying, "Ma'am, are you okay?" And I could not answer him. I just handed him the phone. The police reached Mrs. Harper's house about 6 minutes later. The people were gone. The back door frame was splintered near the latch. The chair was tipped over. The front doormat had been moved and flipped upside down. There was a key taped under it, but it wasn't Mrs. Harper's current key. It was old, probably from before she changed the locks years earlier. The officer asked me if I knew anyone who would have known about the key. I said no. The next day, Mrs. Harper's daughter went through the house with police. Nothing was missing because they never made it fully inside. But outside, near the blue house, they found 2 grocery bags in the empty dumpster. One had a pharmacy label torn off a prescription bag with Mrs. Harper's name on it. The other had mail from 3 houses on the block. The woman in the fleece vest had not been a neighbor. No one on the street knew her. A contractor working on the blue house told police he had seen a woman hanging around the property earlier that week, and he assumed she was with the owner. She had asked him if the old lady next door was still in the hospital. That sentence stayed with me. Not Mrs. Harper. Not Evelyn. The old lady next door. The police said it looked like they had been watching the house because they thought it was empty, then adjusted once they realized I was there. Maybe they wanted medication. Maybe money. Maybe they thought an older woman kept cash hidden. I never got a clear answer. Mrs. Harper apologized to me over and over. I told her it wasn't her fault, and I meant it. She didn't make those people come to her door. She didn't make me stay quiet when things fell off. I moved out of that house the next morning and stayed with a co-worker until Mrs. Harper's family came back. For weeks after, I hated taking trash out at night. I hated mail slots. I hated strangers who knew one correct detail about someone and used it to sound safe. The thing I learned wasn't deep. It was simple. Someone can know a name, a schedule, and a neighborhood and still have no right to be near your door. Story 3. The key was sitting on the 3rd porch step when I came back from taking out the trash. It was one of those old motel keys with a diamond-shaped plastic tag, faded blue, the kind you barely see anymore. On the tag, someone had written 6 in black marker. I was 27 then, working remote billing for a dental office out of Asheville, and I had been staying alone in my uncle's old house outside Banner Elk, North Carolina, for almost 2 weeks. I was there because my lease had ended, my breakup had been ugly, and my uncle said I could stay free if I helped clean the place before he sold it. The house sat on a narrow mountain road with maybe 8 other homes spread out along it. In the 1970s, the property had been part of a little roadside place called the Mountain View Motel. The motel itself had been torn down years before, but the old office had become the house I was staying in. There was still a rusted metal signpost near the driveway, with no sign on it anymore. I noticed the key because it had not been there 10 minutes earlier. At first I just picked it up and looked around. The road was empty. The trees were wet from rain. The only sound was water dripping from the gutters. I thought maybe some hiker had found it by the road and tossed it up there, or maybe it had fallen out of an old drawer while I was dragging trash bags around. That house was full of junk. Old ashtrays, folded maps, invoices from the 80s, hotel soaps in a box under the sink. I brought the key inside and put it on the kitchen counter. It did not fit the front door. I tried it once without thinking. It slid halfway in and stopped. I laughed at myself because I was alone and embarrassed even though nobody saw me do it. That afternoon, a woman pulled into the gravel driveway in a silver minivan. She sat there for a while before getting out. I watched from the kitchen window because I did not know anybody up there. She had a printed paper in one hand and a suitcase in the other. She came up the steps and pressed the doorbell. The bell did not work, so I opened the door with the chain on. She looked tired, not scary. Maybe in her 50s. "Is this room 6? She asked. I just stared at her for a second. "No," I said. "This is a private house." She looked down at her paper, then back up at the porch. "It says Mountain View. Self-check-in. Room 6. I told her the motel had been gone for years. She got annoyed, but not at me exactly. She said she had already paid. I asked what site she used, and she turned the paper around. It was not any rental site I recognized. It looked like a confirmation email printed out. The address was mine. The photo on it showed the front of the house, but not like the old real estate listing photos. It was taken from the road, recent enough that my uncle's trash bin was in the picture. That bothered me more than the key. I told her I was sorry, but I could not help. She stood there for a second like she wanted to argue, then rolled her suitcase back to the minivan. Before she left, she said, "You should tell whoever owns this place to take the listing down." I called my uncle right after. He said he had not listed anything. He sounded more irritated than worried. He told me old motel stuff still popped up online sometimes and people got confused. I wanted to believe that. I really did. I was broke, tired, and trying to pretend I had my life under control. Calling the sheriff because a confused woman came to the door felt dramatic. So I made pasta, worked until almost 9, and ignored it. Around 10:30, I heard gravel crunch outside. Not a car pulling in. Just one crunch, then another, like someone stepping slowly in the driveway. I muted my laptop and listened. The house had that mountain silence where every small sound feels close. I went to the kitchen window but kept the lights off. I could not see anyone. The porch light only reached the first few steps and the wet railing. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I did not know. It said, "Here for late check-in. Door code not working." I did not answer. A few seconds later another message came. "Is this Mia?" My name is Mia. I still remember the way I held my phone after reading that. Not panic exactly. More like my brain took a second to catch up. I had told myself all day that the woman was a mistake. But now someone had my name, my address, and thought there was a door code. The porch boards creaked. I moved away from the window and went to the front door. The chain was on. The deadbolt was locked. The old motel key was still on the kitchen counter, sitting next to my water glass. A man's voice came from the other side of the door. "Hello." I did not answer. He knocked once. Soft. "Hey, I'm not trying to bother you." The message said the side door was better. I backed up so fast I hit the table. The side door was off the kitchen. It led to a little covered walkway where the vending machines had been back when the place was a motel. I had only used it once because it stuck badly. There was a cheap deadbolt on it and a chain my uncle had put on years earlier. I ran to that door and checked it. Locked. Outside, footsteps moved across the porch, then down the steps. I grabbed a knife from the block because it was the closest thing there. I know that sounds stupid, but when something like that happens, you grab whatever is in front of you. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. The side doorknob turned. Not hard. Not like someone breaking in. Just a normal turn, like he expected it to open. Then I heard metal scrape inside the lock. He had a key. The deadbolt shifted a little but caught. The chain rattled. He stopped. For a few seconds, neither of us made a sound. Then he said very calmly, "The key's bad." I covered my mouth with my hand. I did not want him to hear me breathing. He tried again. The key went in and out. In and out. He was not rushing. That was the worst part. He sounded patient, like a man fixing a problem. I called 911 from the kitchen floor. I whispered my address and told the dispatcher someone was trying to unlock my side door. She asked if I could get to a room with a lock. The only interior lock that worked was the bathroom off the laundry room, but it had a small window that opened toward the back slope. While I was whispering, the doorknob stopped moving. Then my phone buzzed again. "Open up." I paid. I crawled through the laundry room and shut the bathroom door behind me. The dispatcher stayed on the line. I could hear the man walking around outside now, down the side of the house, past the old office window. There were leaves and gravel under his feet. Then the front door handle moved. He had gone back around. The dispatcher asked if I could stay hidden. I looked at the bathroom window. It was high and narrow, and it opened to the steep part behind the house. I had opened it earlier that week because the room smelled damp. The screen was loose. Then I heard glass tap. Not break. Tap. He was at the kitchen window. I stood on the toilet, pushed the bathroom window up, and shoved the screen out. It fell into the wet leaves. I told the dispatcher what I was doing. She told me not to leave unless I had to. Then the glass tapped again, harder. I climbed out. I landed badly on my side and slid a little down the slope. Mud went up my sleeve and under my shirt. I still had the phone in my hand. I crawled behind a rhododendron bush and stayed there, looking back at the house. From there I could see the kitchen window. A man was standing on the little concrete pad outside it. He wore a dark rain jacket with the hood up. He had one hand cupped against the glass, trying to see in. I remember his posture more than his face. He did not look frantic. He looked like he had time. I stayed behind that bush until I saw headlights coming up the road. It was not the sheriff at first. It was a volunteer firefighter from down the mountain. The dispatcher had sent whoever was closest. He pulled into the driveway with his light bar flashing. The man at the window turned his head once, then ran into the trees behind the old signpost. The firefighter yelled my name. I did not stand up until he said it twice. The deputies got there maybe 10 minutes later. They searched the woods but did not find him. What they did find was a little worse in a way, because it made everything feel planned instead of random. There was fresh mud under the side door lock and scratches around the deadbolt. The key he had used was found in the grass near the porch. It was not the blue motel key from my counter. It was a copied house key, the kind made at a hardware store. My uncle later figured out it matched an old spare he had kept in a contractor lockbox years before. The lockbox had been removed, but he had used the same code for it that he used for his garage keypad. That code was written in a notebook in the old office desk, which had been thrown out during a clean-out before I got there. The fake listing was real. A deputy found it the next morning after searching the exact wording from the woman's paper. It was on a cheap classified site, not a normal rental app. It had photos of the house from the road, and one photo taken through the front window, showing the living room after I had already started cleaning. In that photo, my laptop was visible on the couch. My uncle kept saying he did not understand how anyone got inside to take it, but the deputy pointed out the window was low enough to shoot a picture through from the porch if the curtains were open. The listing said, "Quiet mountain room. Woman on site for check-in. Cash accepted for extra nights." I still hate that sentence. They never found the man. The phone number that texted me stopped working. The woman in the minivan gave a statement and said the person who messaged her had claimed to be Mia at Mountain View. She was just another person who got pulled into it. I left the next morning. I did not help my uncle finish cleaning. I did not care about saving money anymore. For months afterward, I could not stay anywhere with a glass door. I stopped posting where I was. I stopped using my first name on public profiles. I still check rental photos for reflections in windows, because now I know how much they can show. People think a locked door means nobody can come in. A locked door also tells you something else. It tells you when someone expected to. Story 4. By 11 at night, the dryers at Ridgeway Coin Laundry sounded louder than traffic. I was 22, taking classes at a community college outside Denver and working the closing shift 4 nights a week. The laundromat sat in a strip mall between a liquor store and a closed tax office, with a trailhead parking lot across the street. I was alone most nights because the owner said the cameras were good and the area was mostly fine. I needed the money, and I needed to prove I could handle things without calling my manager every time someone weird walked in. The first time the man came in, I thought he was with search and rescue. He wore an orange jacket with reflective strips and a patch on the chest. He was maybe 40, average build, clean-shaven, with wet hair pushed back like he had just taken off a hat. He had a stack of flyers in one hand. "Can I put this up?" he asked. I was wiping lint off the folding tables. I said sure before even looking at it. The flyer had a picture of a young woman with dark hair. Under it were the words "missing runner." There was a name, a height, and a phone number. He taped it to the corkboard near the change machine. "Rough night?" I asked, mostly to be polite. He nodded. "She got separated up by the North Trail." That made sense. People got turned around up there all the time, especially tourists. The trailhead lot across the street was always full during the day. He looked around the laundromat. There were two customers inside, an old man washing blankets and a woman folding kids' clothes with headphones in. The man asked, "You open late every night?" I told him we closed at midnight. He nodded again. Good to know. I did not like the way he said it, but I had dealt with men who made awkward conversation before. I went back to work. He left. 20 minutes later, he came back and bought a water from the vending machine. He stood near the front window, drinking it slowly, looking across at the trailhead. I thought maybe he was waiting for other volunteers. Then he said, "Do you have a restroom?" I pointed to the sign that said restroom was for customers only. He smiled like he understood. No problem. He did not leave right away. He walked past the washers, past the folding tables, all the way to the back hallway where the restroom and supply closet were. I had to call out, "Sir, it's back here only if you're doing laundry." He stopped and looked over his shoulder. "Just checking the exit," he said. "There's no exit back there," I told him. He came back slowly. He did not seem embarrassed. He just lifted one hand like it was nothing and left again. I watched him cross the parking lot and get into a white SUV. I could not see the plate because the back of it faced the trees. The old man left around 11:30. The woman with the kids' clothes left 5 minutes after that. I locked the side door we used for deliveries. The front door stayed open until midnight because my boss was strict about that. If the sign said open, we were open. At 11:40, a girl came in. She was not the girl from the flyer at first glance, but close enough that I looked at the board and back at her. She was younger than me, maybe 19 or 20. Her hair was wet and stuck to her face. She had mud on one knee, and one sleeve of her hoodie was torn at the cuff. She did not walk to the machines. She walked straight to my counter. "Is there another way out?" she asked. Her voice was low, almost flat, like she was trying not to cry in public. I said, "Are you okay?" She shook her head once. "Please, is there another way out?" Before I could answer, headlights swept across the windows. She turned and looked. Her whole face changed. The white SUV was back. The man in the orange jacket got out. The girl stepped behind the snack machine like she could disappear there. The man came in smiling, not wide, just calm. "There you are," he said. He did not say her name. The girl did not answer. I moved behind the counter because there was a panic button under it. It did not call police directly. It called the owner's phone and the alarm company, which was not as comforting as it sounds. The man looked at me. "She's with us. She's confused." The girl said, "I'm not." Her voice was so small I almost missed it. He kept his eyes on me. "We've been searching for her." She wandered off. I looked at the flyer again. The name on the flyer was Jenna. I asked, "Is your name Jenna?" The girl shook her head. The man laughed a little. "She's scared. People say things." I noticed then that his jacket patch said Clear Creek Rescue, but we were in Jefferson County. That did not mean much to me, but I had lived there long enough to know the local volunteer groups were proud of their patches. Also, he had no radio, no pack, no headlamp, nothing you would expect from someone out searching in the foothills at night. I said, "I'm going to call my manager." His smile went away. "No need," he said. "We'll take her." He took one step toward the snack machine. The girl backed into a row of dryers and hit one with her hip. I pressed the panic button. Then I grabbed the store phone and dialed the auto shop next door. The owner, Luis, worked late on Wednesdays because he repaired fleet vans after hours. I knew he was there because I had heard his compressor earlier. The man watched my hand. "Who are you calling?" I said, "The person who owns the building." That was a lie, but it sounded official. He looked at the girl again. "Come on." She whispered, "No." Then he moved fast. Not running, not grabbing yet, just closing the distance like he had decided the talking part was over. I yelled, "Luis." I do not know why I yelled before I knew he had answered, but I did. I yelled loud enough that the girl flinched. The man stopped. For 1 second, all three of us were frozen under those ugly fluorescent lights. Then the phone clicked. Luis said, "What?" I said, "Come here now." Front door. The man turned toward the windows. The auto shop lights came on next door. A second later, the metal bay door started rattling up. The man said, "You're making this harder." He said it to the girl, not to me. I told her, "Go behind the counter." She moved, but the man moved too. I grabbed the plastic bottle of bleach spray from under the counter and held it up like it was a weapon. It was stupid and probably would not have stopped him, but he looked at it and paused. Luis came through the front door carrying a tire iron, with grease on his shirt and one glove still on. He looked at the man's jacket and then at the girl. "Do you know him?" The girl said, "No." The man lifted both hands. "She's confused. We're search and rescue." Luis said, "Where's your truck?" The man pointed outside. "Right there." Luis looked past him at the white SUV. "That's not rescue." The man's face changed again. Not angry exactly. Just empty. Luis stepped farther inside and said, "You need to leave." For a moment, I thought the man would argue. Instead, he backed toward the door. He looked at the girl one more time and said, "You don't know what you're doing." Then he walked out. Luis followed him to the sidewalk, but did not go farther. The man got into the SUV and drove away, without headlights, for the first few seconds. Then they clicked on near the driveway, and he turned toward the highway. The girl started crying after he was gone. Not loud. She just slid down behind the counter and covered her face. We took her next door into the auto shop because it had a locking office. Luis called 911 from there. I sat on an upside-down bucket with her while we waited. She told us her name was Marissa. She had met the man 2 days earlier through a local running group online. He said he volunteered with trail rescues and knew safe routes for night training. That evening, he offered to show her a loop near the trailhead. She said the first part was normal. Then he kept leading her away from the marked trail. When she said she wanted to go back, he told her the other way was washed out. She got scared and pretended to stop to tie her shoe, then ran downhill until she hit the road. She saw our laundromat lights and came in. The flyer was not for her. The woman in the picture was from a different missing person post from another state. He had changed the name. The number on the flyer rang to his own phone. He had taped it up so he would look official if anyone questioned him. The police did not catch him that night. They took the flyer, pulled camera footage from our laundromat, and got a clear shot of his face from the change machine camera. That camera had audio too, which I had not known. It recorded him asking me what time we closed, asking about the restroom, and saying he was just checking the exit. The real search and rescue group in our county told police the jacket was not theirs. The patch was close but wrong. It looked like something ordered online. The reflective pants were just road work pants. A detective came by 2 days later and asked for my statement again. He told me Marissa was lucky she came into a place with cameras and somebody next door. He did not say much else, but he did tell me they were checking other reports from women who had been approached near trailheads by a man claiming to be a volunteer. I quit the laundromat before the end of that month. My boss said I was overreacting because nothing actually happened inside the store. I remember staring at him when he said that. Nothing happened because we made noise. Nothing happened because Luis was still awake next door. Nothing happened because Marissa asked for help before she was too scared to speak. I still hike, but I do not follow strangers from online groups. I ask for IDs now. I look at patches. I notice who has a radio and who is just wearing the costume of someone safe. The part that stays with me is not the jacket. It is how normal he sounded while he lied. Story 5. Never trust check-in directions that pull you away from the app. I know that sounds obvious, but it did not feel obvious after 7 hours of driving through rain with 1 bar of service and a cheaper place already paid for. I was 34, a traveling physical therapist from Tulsa, heading to a 6-week contract at a rehab hospital in southern West Virginia. I was recently divorced, carrying more debt than I admitted to anyone, and trying to save money wherever I could. That was why I booked a little rental house outside a town called Danton instead of staying at the chain hotel near the hospital. The first strange thing happened before I even reached town. I got a text from a local number that said, "App chat acting up. This is Elaine, your host. GPS gets people lost. Use these directions instead." The host's name on the rental app was Elaine, so I did not think much of it. The message had my first name, my check-in date, and the last 4 digits of my phone number. It said to ignore the app address once I got close because the road split at a switchback and GPS sent guests to a hunting road. I did not like being contacted off the app. I had traveled enough to know better. But I was tired, my wipers were squeaking, and the message sounded helpful. It said, "At black mailbox, take up a road. House is above the switchback." Key under blue flower pot. I found the black mailbox just before dark. The upper road was narrow and steep. My tires slipped once on wet leaves. The house sat above a sharp bend, half hidden by trees, with a porch light already on. It was small, yellow, and plain. There was a blue flower pot by the door. The key was under it. Inside, the house felt cold in a way I did not expect. Not just unheated. Empty. The living room had a couch, a lamp, a small TV, and a folded blanket in a basket. The kitchen had 2 plates and 1 pan. No welcome book. No Wi-Fi card. No little basket of coffee like most rentals had. But the bed had clean sheets, and the bathroom had towels, so I told myself Elaine was just low effort. I texted the number. "I'm here." It replied, "Good. Park around bend, not in front." Neighbor gets mad. That annoyed me. The listing had said free parking on site, but the driveway was tight, and I did not want trouble with a neighbor in a town where I knew nobody. I moved my car around the bend to a gravel pull-off below the house. From the porch, I could barely see the roof of it through the trees. I carried my bag in, locked the door, and made ramen in the microwave. Around 9, someone walked across the porch. Not up the steps. Across it, the boards creaked from left to right, slow. I froze with the fork in my hand. There were no curtains on the little kitchen window, only blinds that did not close all the way. I turned off the microwave light and stood against the wall. A woman's voice called from outside. "You the renter?" She sounded older. I did not open the door. I said through it, "Yes." A pause. "You at Elaine's?" "Yes." Another pause, longer. Then she said, "Which Elaine?" That made me step closer to the door. I said, "The host." The woman gave a short sound that was not a laugh exactly. "All right." I looked through the peephole, but there was no peephole. Just smooth wood and a deadbolt. Her footsteps went back across the porch and down the steps. A minute later, headlights moved through the trees and disappeared down the lower road. I opened the rental app and tried to message Elaine there. It spun for a long time and failed. My signal kept dropping from 1 bar to nothing. I went to the bedroom window and held the phone up until one message finally loaded. It was from the real Elaine, sent 3 hours earlier. "Safe travels. Keypad code is 4821. Porch light will be on. Please do not use the upper road. It belongs to the abandoned house above the switchback." I read it 3 times. The house I was standing in did not have a keypad. I went cold all over. I tried calling Elaine through the app. It failed. I tried again from the kitchen. Failed. Then the local number texted me. "Everything okay?" I did not answer. Another text came. Light went off. I looked at the lamp beside the couch. I had turned it off when I heard the porch. Whoever was texting me could see the house. I put my shoes back on quietly. My car was down around the bend, where they had told me to park it. My suitcase was open on the bed, clothes everywhere. I did not care. I grabbed my keys, wallet, and charger. Then someone knocked on the door. 3 taps. Calm. I did not move. A man said, "Elaine asked me to check the heater." I stood in the hallway between the bedroom and living room, holding my keys so tight they pressed into my palm. He knocked again. "Ma'am," I said, "I'm okay. The heater's been acting up." "It's fine." A pause. Then he said, "Open up a second." I looked toward the back of the house. There was a kitchen door, but when I checked it earlier, it opened onto a tiny muddy slope with no steps. In daylight, maybe I could have climbed down. In the dark and rain, I would probably fall before I got 10 feet. My phone buzzed again. "Don't be rude. He helps with the house." That message did something to me. It made me angry enough to think clearly for a few seconds. I called my younger brother, Evan. I did not know if it would go through, but I tried. It rang once and dropped. I tried again from the bedroom window. 1 ring. 2. Then he answered. "Hey." I spoke fast and low. "I'm at the wrong house. I'm sending location. Stay on the phone." He went quiet in the way people do when they know not to ask questions yet. The man at the door knocked harder. "Ma'am, I need to look at the unit." I yelled back, louder this time. "I'm on the phone with my brother. He's a deputy." That was a lie. Evan sold insurance in Tulsa. The knocking stopped. Evan said, "What is happening?" I whispered, "Just keep talking." He started talking about nothing. Weather. His kids. A football game. His voice was shaking, but he kept going. I opened the app map again. The real rental was not far. Maybe half a mile down the lower road. I had been led to the abandoned house above it. My car was between the two, parked below the bend. Then I heard another sound outside. A vehicle door closing. The man was not alone. I went to the front window and looked through the gap in the blinds. A pickup was parked near the porch now. Its lights were off. I could see the shape of one man by the steps and another standing closer to the road. The second man had a flashlight pointed down, not at the house. Like he was waiting. I could not stay inside. I also could not run blind into the woods. So I made myself sound annoyed instead of scared. I opened the door with the chain on. The man on the porch was in his 30s, wearing a ball cap and a rain jacket. He smiled like we had already met. "There she is," he said. I held up my phone so he could see the call screen. "My brother wants your name." His smile got smaller. He said, "No need for that." Evan, hearing me, said loudly, "Ask him what company he works for." I repeated it. The man glanced toward the road. "Look, I'm just trying to help," he said. "I'm leaving," I said. "Wrong house." He put his hand flat on the door. "Not pushing yet. Just resting it there." "You already paid," he said. Those words made no sense unless he knew more than a random handyman should. I closed the door and slid the chain off as quietly as I could. Then I opened it all the way before he expected it. I stepped out fast, not running, because running would have given him permission in his own mind to chase. I kept the phone up and said, "Evan, you see him?" There was no video. The camera was not on. But the man did not know that. Evan said, "Yeah, I see him." The man moved aside just enough. I walked down the porch steps and toward the bend. The second man turned his flashlight toward me. "Where are you going?" he asked. "My car." "You can't leave your stuff." "I'll come back with the sheriff." Again, a lie. Neither of them touched me. That is the part people ask about. Why did they let me walk? I think they were still deciding what I knew. I think the phone made them unsure. I think they wanted someone easy, quiet, embarrassed. I was still scared, but I was no longer being quiet for them. The walk to my car felt endless. Wet gravel shifted under my shoes. My brother kept talking. He said, "Keep walking. Don't look back." Of course I looked back once. Both men were following, but not close. I got in my car, locked it, and started it. The first man came up to the passenger side and tapped the glass. "You're confused," he said. I backed out so badly my rear tire hit the ditch. For a second, the wheel spun. The man stepped back. I put the car in drive, turned downhill, and let it roll until the tires caught. I did not use my high beams because the road bent too hard and the rain reflected back. I just crawled down that switchback with my brother breathing into the phone. At the bottom, I saw another porch light. The real rental. I did not stop there. I drove until I reached a gas station with 2 trucks out front and a woman smoking under the awning. I parked crooked, went inside, and told the clerk I needed help. Evan called the county sheriff from Oklahoma, while the clerk called locally. The real Elaine arrived at the gas station about 20 minutes later in pajama pants and a coat. She was horrified. Her house did have a keypad. It was on the lower road. She said guests sometimes missed the turn, but nobody had ever been sent to the upper house before. The abandoned house belonged to a man who had died the year before. It was tied up in some family dispute and had been empty for months. The power should not have been on, but someone had turned it back on at the breaker outside. The deputies checked it that night after I gave them the key. My suitcase was still there, zipped closed on the bed. I had left it open. Nothing was missing. That bothered me more than if they had stolen it. They found a cheap phone charger plugged into the wall and a handwritten list in the kitchen drawer with 3 first names on it. Mine was the last one. Next to my name was my check-in date and the words "solo late." Nobody could prove where the list came from. Elaine later found out her email had been compromised, not the rental app itself. Someone had set up a filter that forwarded booking confirmations to another address. That was how they got my phone number and knew when I was coming. The local number stopped answering. The 2 men were not at the house when deputies arrived. The older woman who had come to the porch gave a statement later. She lived farther down the road and said she had seen lights at the abandoned place twice that month. She thought family members were cleaning it out. When she saw me there, she knew something was off, but she also did not want to get involved. I understand that more than I wish I did. I stayed at the chain hotel after that, even though it wrecked my budget. I changed every password I had. I stopped accepting off-app messages from hosts. I also stopped trying to be the kind of traveler who never causes trouble. For a long time, I was embarrassed by how close I came to settling in for the night at the wrong house. But that is how these things work. They do not always force you. Sometimes they just make the wrong place look convenient. And if you are tired enough, cheap enough, or lonely enough, you carry your own bags inside. Story 6. I didn't hear him behind me. That's the part that still bothers me the most. Snow makes noise. Boots crunch. Branches scrape against jackets. Breath comes out loud when the air gets thin and cold. But when I looked down and saw those prints beside mine, deep and fresh in the powder, there had been nothing behind me except fog and the dull thump of my own heartbeat. I was 29 then, working maintenance at a hospital in Missoula, Montana. It was January, the dead middle of it, when everything feels gray and permanent. My dad had been staying with me after his surgery, and my older sister kept calling to remind me what pills he needed, what food he could eat, what I was doing wrong. I was already exhausted from night shifts, already behind on rent, already sleeping on my couch because Dad had my bedroom. That morning, we got into it over something stupid. He had tried to shovel the sidewalk himself, even though the doctor told him not to lift anything heavier than a grocery bag. I snapped. He snapped back. My sister called while we were yelling, and somehow made it worse. So I did what I always did when I didn't know how to talk like a normal person. I left. Not forever. Not dramatically. I just grabbed my old pack, threw in water, a couple granola bars, gloves, a headlamp I barely checked, and drove up toward a trail outside Lolo that I'd hiked maybe 6 or 7 times before. It wasn't a technical route, just a steady climb through pines, then a ridge where you could see the valley if the weather was clear. The weather was not clear. The parking area was empty when I got there. That should have told me something, but honestly, I was relieved. I didn't want to make small talk with anyone wearing bright snow gear and looking like they had their life together. I wanted quiet. I wanted to be angry without someone asking if I was okay. It was around 11:30 in the morning when I started up. The first mile was fine. Cold, but not cruel. Snow fell in thin little flakes, the kind that float sideways and stick to your eyelashes. The trail was easy to see at first because it cut dark through the trees, and I could still hear trucks faintly from the highway below. After that, the woods swallowed everything. No traffic, no birds, no wind even. Just the sound of my boots breaking through the crusted top layer of snow. I remember thinking the silence felt expensive, like something I couldn't afford, but had stolen anyway. For a while it helped. My anger thinned out. I thought about calling my dad when I got back, maybe bringing him soup. Maybe apologizing without turning it into another argument. I even laughed once because I realized I had stormed out of my own apartment like a teenager, except I was a grown man with knee pain and a hospital badge clipped to my jacket. At around 1:15, the fog rolled in. Not slowly. Not like in movies where you watch it creep between trees. 1 minute I could see 40 yards ahead, and then the whole trail tightened around me. The pines became dark smudges. The slope disappeared above me. My breath came back at me in white bursts. I checked my phone. No service. Battery at 38%. That was when I should have turned around. Instead, I kept going another 15 minutes because I'm stubborn in the dumbest way. I told myself I knew the trail. I told myself I was close to the ridge. I told myself the fog would lift. Then I stepped into a patch of knee-deep snow where the trail bent left, and when I pulled my boot out, I saw another print beside it. At first, it didn't scare me. It was just a boot print. Bigger than mine, I thought. Maybe a size 12. Deep heel. Wide tread. I stood there, squinting at it through the fog, and tried to understand why it looked so fresh. There hadn't been any other cars in the lot, but that didn't mean anything. Someone could have started earlier. Someone could have come from a connecting trail. Hunters used those woods sometimes, even where they weren't supposed to. I took 3 more steps. The other prints continued beside mine. Not crossing, not coming from ahead. Just beside mine, maybe 2 feet to the right, angled the same way up the trail. I stopped. The forest stopped with me. That's what it felt like. Like every small noise had been waiting for me to keep moving. I turned around and looked back. There were my footprints heading up the trail. And beside them, the other set, running parallel as far back as the fog allowed me to see. Maybe 10 yards. Maybe less. I tried to laugh. It came out wrong. Okay, I said out loud, because sometimes hearing your own voice makes things normal again. Somebody's out here. No answer. I waited. I listened hard enough that my ears started ringing. Nothing. I decided right then that I was done. Ridge or no ridge, I was going back. I took a sip of water, tightened my gloves, and turned around. That was when I noticed the second strange thing. The other footprints also turned around. I don't mean they curved gradually or crossed the trail like someone had wandered. They turned at the same place I did. Their toes pointed downhill now, just like mine. I stood there longer than I should have. My brain kept trying to solve it, because brains hate being scared. Maybe I had passed someone earlier and hadn't noticed. Maybe the fog and snow made older prints look fresh. Maybe they were mine from a previous hike somehow, though that was impossible because it had snowed all night. I started walking downhill, faster than before. The trail was harder to follow on the way down. Everything looked different in fog. Trees I had passed earlier looked unfamiliar, bent in shapes I didn't remember. My own tracks helped, at least for a while. I kept stepping into them, trying not to look too much at the second set beside me. But I kept looking, every 20 steps, then every 10. They stayed there, sometimes close, sometimes drifting a little farther right, weaving around trees where the slope tightened, then returning beside mine like someone had politely stepped around an obstacle. I remember thinking, whoever it is, he's walking exactly where I can't see him. That thought made my stomach feel hollow. About halfway down, the fog thickened so much that the trail became a white hallway. My eyelashes froze at the edges. My fingers started to ache. I pulled my phone out again, hoping for a bar, but there was nothing. Battery at 24%. I tried calling anyway. Emergency calls only. It didn't go through. Then something cracked behind me. Not close. Not far. A branch, maybe. I spun around. The fog moved in soft sheets between the trunks. "Hello!" I shouted. The word died immediately. Snow does that. It takes your voice and presses it flat. No one answered. I didn't run, because running downhill on packed snow is how you break your ankle and become a news article. But I moved fast. Too fast. My boots slid. My knees jolted. My breath started coming in ugly little gasps. After maybe 5 minutes, I realized I wasn't following my uphill tracks anymore. That stopped me harder than the branch had. My prints should have been right there, clear as a rope leading me down. But the line I was following had become messy, churned up, doubled back. There were too many steps. Mine. The other ones. Maybe old animal tracks underneath. Maybe I had stepped over myself. I turned in a slow circle. Everything was white and black and close. "No," I said. "No, no, no." I checked the map app on my phone. The screen loaded half a trail shape, then froze. The little blue dot jumped once, then slid sideways into blank space like it had given up. Battery at 18%. The official advice is always simple when you get lost. Stop. Stay put. Call for help. Make yourself visible. But official advice sounds different when you're alone in fog, and the only evidence of another human being is a set of prints that started from nowhere. I kept moving. That was my first big mistake. The slope dropped steeper than I remembered. I grabbed trees to slow myself. Snow slid down my boots and into my socks. Once I slipped and landed hard on my hip, and the pain flashed so bright I almost threw up. When I got back up, I saw the other prints continuing past the place I had fallen. Ahead of me, that was the moment I started to panic for real. Because until then, no matter how strange it was, the prints had been beside mine or behind them. Now they were in front, going downhill, disappearing into fog. Someone had passed me. Someone had passed me while I was on the ground, and I had heard nothing. I stood there with one hand on a tree, breathing through my mouth. "Hey!" I yelled. "I see your tracks." "Nothing. Do you need help?" That part embarrasses me now, but it's true. Even then, some part of me thought maybe someone was lost too. Maybe they were afraid. Maybe they didn't speak English. Maybe they were injured and trying to stay hidden for some reason that would make sense later. Then a voice came from somewhere below. Not words, just a cough. One short cough, muffled by distance and fog. Every muscle in me locked. "Hey!" I shouted. "Are you hurt?" No answer. I waited. Then it came again. Cough. Lower this time. To the left. I started toward it before I could think better of it, stepping carefully, following the deeper boot prints. The trees thinned a little, and the snow became uneven under me. There were rocks beneath it. I could feel them shifting. Then the ground vanished. I stopped one step from a drop. It wasn't a cliff exactly, but it was steep enough that if I had taken another step, I would have slid down through rocks and deadfall into a narrow drainage gully. Maybe 20 feet. Maybe more. I couldn't see the bottom because of the fog. The boot prints went right to the edge. And stopped. My body went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. I crouched and looked around, trying to see if the person had climbed down. There were scrape marks in the snow near the edge. A broken branch. One partial handprint pressed into the white crust. Then I heard it again. The cough. From below. "Are you down there?" I called. This time a voice answered. It was faint and rough, like someone speaking through a blanket. "Don't leave." I nearly fell backward. "What?" "Don't leave me." I couldn't see him. I couldn't see anything. Just fog sliding up from the gully like steam. I yelled that I was going to call 911, even though my phone barely had battery and no service. I said it loudly, partly for him and partly for whoever else might be listening. I backed away from the edge and climbed 10 yards uphill until I found a cluster of trees where the wind hadn't filled in my tracks. My phone showed 12%. I tried 911 again. This time the call connected for 2 seconds. I heard a click, a burst of static, and maybe a woman's voice. Then it dropped. I tried again. Nothing. I sent a text to my sister, lost on Lolo Trail. Possible injured hiker. Call 911. Phone dying. It hung there unsent. Then somehow one bar appeared. The text sent. I almost cried when I saw the little delivered mark. Then my phone died. The next 40 minutes were the longest of my life. I stayed near those trees because I was terrified of losing the gully and terrified of getting closer to it. I kept shouting down every few minutes. Sometimes the voice answered. Mostly it didn't. When it did, it said the same things. "Still here. Cold. Don't go." I asked his name. He didn't answer. I asked if he could move. He said, "No." Once, I asked how long he'd been down there. After a pause, he said, "Since yesterday." That changed everything. Because if he had been down there since yesterday, those fresh prints beside mine couldn't have been his. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't, honestly. Search and rescue found me just before dusk. I heard voices first, real voices, men calling my last name through the trees. Then I saw headlamps floating in the fog. I started yelling so hard my throat burned. They reached me with a sheriff's deputy and 2 volunteers. I was shaking badly by then, not just from fear. One of them wrapped a silver blanket around my shoulders while I pointed toward the gully and kept saying, "He's down there. There's someone down there." They found him 15 minutes later. His name was Andrew Keller, 34 years old, accountant from Boise. He had been reported missing the night before after failing to return from a day hike. He'd slipped in fog, gone over the edge, and landed with a broken leg and a concussion. He was alive barely. At the hospital later, a deputy came to take my statement. He was kind, tired-looking. He asked me to walk him through everything from the parking lot to the gully. I told him about the footprints. I told him they appeared beside mine. I told him they turned when I turned. I told him they were ahead of me before I found the drop. He wrote it down, but I could tell he didn't know what to do with it. A search volunteer later gave the official explanation. He said in fog and low light, tracks can look different than they are. He said I had probably crossed Andrew's route from the day before without realizing it. Wind can refill old prints unevenly. Snow can make them look new. Panic can make patterns out of chaos. I accepted that because it was easier than the alternative. But 2 days after the rescue, my sister sent me a screenshot from a local news article. It mentioned that search crews had followed multiple overlapping tracks near the drainage. Nothing dramatic. Just a line in a small-town report. Multiple overlapping tracks. I called the sheriff's office and asked, probably sounding insane, whether they knew whose other tracks they were. The woman on the phone paused long enough for me to hear, someone talking in the background. Then she said, "Sir, there were a lot of responders up there by the end." I said I meant before that. She repeated, softer. "There were a lot of responders. Andrew survived. I know that because he sent me a message a month later. He thanked me. Said he didn't remember much except hearing someone above him yelling his name, though I never knew his name at the time. He said he remembered trying to crawl the first day, then giving up. I asked him one question. Had he been walking beside me at any point? He didn't reply for almost a week. Then he wrote back, 'I couldn't walk. I'm sorry.' That was it. I don't hike alone anymore. I barely hike at all. When it snows, I look down more than I look ahead. I watch the ground outside my apartment. The sidewalk outside work. Parking lots. Trails of slush near gas pumps. Sometimes, after a fresh snowfall, I'll see my own footprints behind me and feel this stupid flash of panic until I count them, match them, prove they're mine. But the worst nights are quiet nights. Because I remember standing in that fog, staring at those prints beside mine, and realizing something had been close enough to leave a mark in the snow, but silent enough that the mountain itself didn't seem to notice. Story 7. Story 7. The first thing written in the logbook was my full name. Not just Jake, not initials, not some coincidence I could laugh off later. Jacob Daniel Mercer. Under it was the date. Same day, same month, same year. And below that, in handwriting that looked close enough to mine to make my stomach turn, was one sentence. We should not have opened the door after midnight. I read it twice before I understood what I was seeing. Then I closed the book. I was 32, living in Spokane, and that trip was supposed to be the thing that fixed me. Not in some deep, spiritual way. I just needed one weekend where my phone wasn't buzzing with overdue bills and my manager asking if I could cover another shift. I worked at a print shop that smelled like toner and burnt dust, and I had been taking every extra hour I could get because my ex had moved out 3 months earlier and left me with rent I couldn't afford. My friends, Miles and Tessa, were the ones who pushed for the mountain trip. Cheap therapy, Miles called it. He was the kind of guy who owned 3 different headlamps and said stuff like, "weather window," in normal conversation. Tessa was quieter, a nurse who had this calm way of talking that made you feel stupid for panicking. We'd all known each other since community college, back when none of us had money, but we thought that was temporary. We picked a 2-night route in the Cascades, nothing extreme. There was a trailhead, a loop, and an official shelter listed about 9 miles in. The forecast said cold but manageable. Light snow. Wind overnight. We had gear, maps, a satellite messenger that Miles rented, and enough food for 3 days. The first few hours were honestly beautiful. The trail climbed through wet pine forest, past rocks glazed with ice and little streams that had frozen at the edges. We joked about how miserable we looked compared to outdoor influencers. Tessa took pictures of everything. Miles kept checking the map like he was guiding an expedition instead of 2 adults who could read trail signs. By late afternoon, the sky changed. It happened fast. Gray clouds dropped so low they seemed tangled in the trees. The wind came in hard enough to slap snow off branches. Then the trail markers started disappearing under fresh powder. Miles said we were still fine. Tessa said we should turn around. I said almost nothing, because I had been the one complaining all week that I needed to get away, and I didn't want to be the reason we bailed. That was my vulnerability, I guess. Pride. Or loneliness. Maybe both. Around 5:20, the storm got serious. Snow came sideways. Not falling. Attacking. Our headlamps lit up millions of white specks, and nothing beyond them. The temperature dropped so sharply that my jaw hurt when I breathed. Miles kept pulling out the map, but it was useless in the wind. The satellite messenger blinked red twice, and then refused to send our check-in. We argued under a stand of trees, shouting over the weather. "We missed the junction," Tessa said. "We didn't miss it," Miles snapped. "There should have been a sign. It's buried." I remember staring between them and feeling this awful childish guilt, like the whole mountain was mad because I'd wanted a break from my life. Then Tessa pointed through the trees. "What is that?" At first it looked like a shadow with straight edges. Then lightning flashed behind the ridge, not a bolt, just a dull pulse in the clouds, and I saw a roof. A cabin. Small. Dark. Tucked between pines at the edge of a clearing. It wasn't on the map. Miles said that immediately, like the cabin had offended him. There's no structure here. Tessa didn't care. She was already moving toward it. The door wasn't locked. It stuck at first, frozen along the bottom, then opened with a sound like tearing cardboard. Inside smelled like old wood, dust, and damp wool. Our headlamps swept across a room, maybe 12 feet by 16. 2 bunks. A small metal stove. Shelves with dented cans. A stack of folded blankets sealed in clear plastic bins. Firewood near the back wall. It felt like a miracle. That was the worst part. We were so grateful for it that none of us wanted to question why it was there. Miles got the stove going after 3 tries. Tessa checked the cans and found beans, soup, peaches, instant coffee. I shook snow out of my sleeves and laughed too hard because I was so relieved I felt drunk. For about 20 minutes, we were happy. Then Miles found the logbook. It was sitting on the shelf beside a cracked pencil and a box of matches. Standard emergency shelter thing. People sign in, note supplies, report damage. Miles opened it near the stove, partly to make sure this was actually a real shelter and not somebody's private hunting cabin. The older entries were normal. 2 hikers from Portland, June 2019. A father and son, September 2021. Someone named Kendra who wrote that the roof leaked over the left bunk. Then a blank stretch. Miles flipped to the last written page. His face changed. Not scared at first. Confused. What? I asked. He turned the book toward me. My name was there. Jacob Daniel Mercer. The ink looked dark. Fresh enough that the page still had that slightly shiny groove where the pen had pressed hard. Under my name, Miles Aaron Pike. Under that, Tessa Lynn Merrow. All 3 of us. Full names. Then the warning. We should not have opened the door after midnight. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. The stove popped softly. Tessa said, "That's not funny." Miles looked offended, which told me he hadn't done it. I looked at Tessa. She looked at me. "No," I said. "No way." Miles flipped back through the book, then forward. There were no torn pages. No other recent entries. No explanation. "Trail permits," Tessa said. "What?" Our names were on the permit. Emergency contact form 2. Miles shook his head. That was online. Somebody could access it. Who? She didn't answer. We told ourselves it was a prank. That some ranger or local kid had found our permit information, beaten us to the cabin, and written it to mess with us. It sounded ridiculous, but every other explanation sounded worse. Miles tried the satellite messenger again. Nothing. My phone had no service. Tessa's had 6% battery and no bars. We kept them off after that. For the next hour, we acted normal in that stiff way people do when nobody wants to admit they're afraid. We ate soup straight from the cans after warming them near the stove. We hung wet socks. Miles checked the door latch. Tessa taped plastic over a gap near the window where wind hissed through. I kept staring at the logbook. At 9:40, we heard something hit the side of the cabin. One solid thump. We all froze. "Snow sliding from the roof," Miles said. Then it happened again. Lower this time. Not the roof. Miles stood and grabbed his trekking pole like that would do anything. "Hello," he called. The wind answered. Tessa whispered, "Don't." Another thump. Then scraping. Slow. Deliberate. Wood on metal, maybe. It came from the wall behind the shelves. Not loud. Just enough to make the skin tighten across my shoulders. Miles opened the door before either of us could stop him. Snow blasted inside. His headlamp beam cut across the clearing. Nothing. No person. No tracks that we could see, because the wind was filling everything as soon as it touched the ground. He shut the door and barred it with a plank we'd found behind the stove. After that, nobody pretended. We sat close to the stove, speaking quietly. At 10:15, Tessa admitted she had seen something earlier. She said when we first came into the cabin, while Miles was messing with the stove, she noticed one of the blankets was warm. "Warm how?" I asked, like someone had just been using it. Miles stared at her. "Why didn't you say that?" "Because we were freezing and I wanted it to be nothing." That answer made perfect sense, which made it worse. At 10:50, I found the second note. It was under the lower bunk, folded into a square and wedged between 2 boards. I only saw it because I dropped my glove and reached too far. The paper was damp at the edges. There were 3 words on it. "Do not answer." Different handwriting this time. Block letters. Pressed so hard the paper almost tore. We all looked at the door. Nobody said midnight, but we were all thinking it. At 11:30, the storm outside changed sound. The wind lowered, then came back in waves. The cabin creaked. Somewhere in the trees, a branch cracked like a rifle shot. Miles kept checking his watch. Tessa told him to stop. At 11:57, there were footsteps outside. Clear. Heavy. Crossing the porch. One step. Then another. Then silence. The three of us stared at the door. A knock came exactly at midnight. Not pounding. Not frantic. 3 polite knocks. Miles backed away from the door. Tessa covered her mouth with one hand. The knock came again. Then a man's voice. Ranger service. Open up. Every part of me wanted to believe it. The voice sounded tired, practical, annoyed by the weather. Exactly how a ranger might sound after hiking through a storm to find 3 idiots in an unmarked shelter. Miles moved toward the door. Tessa grabbed his sleeve. No, she whispered. The voice came again. We got your distress signal. Open the door so I can verify names. Miles whispered. The messenger didn't send. Maybe it did, I whispered back. The man outside said, Jacob Mercer. Miles Pike. Tessa Marrow. I need you to open the door. Hearing my name out there did something to me. Not fear exactly. More like my body stepped away from my mind. Tessa shook her head hard. No. Miles called, show ID at the window. There was a pause. Then the window to our left went black. Someone was standing directly outside it, blocking the storm light. We couldn't see a face. Just dark fabric and the pale oval reflection of our headlamps on glass. The man said, closer now, windows iced over. Open the door. Miles raised his trekking pole. Which station are you from? He called. No answer. Which station? Miles repeated. The figure moved away from the window. Then the door handle jerked down. Once. Twice. The plank held. The man outside stopped sounding like a ranger. Open the door, he said. Not louder. Flatter. Tessa grabbed the logbook and shoved it into her pack. I don't know why. Evidence, maybe. Proof we weren't crazy. The handle jerked again. Then something hit the door hard enough to shake snow from the frame. Miles yelled, back up. We have bear spray. We did not have bear spray. The next hit cracked one of the boards near the latch. Everything became fast after that. Tessa kicked snow over the stove to kill the light. The cabin dropped into darkness except our headlamps, which we turned off almost at the same time. I could hear the man outside breathing now, right against the door. Miles whispered, back window. There was no back window, just a small vent near the roof, too small for a person. The door hit again. Would split. Tessa crawled to the shelves, grabbed the matches, the emergency whistle, and the logbook. Miles and I shoved the bunk against the door. It scraped loud enough to drown the wind. The man outside stopped. For 1 second, I thought he had left. Then smoke drifted through the gap under the door. Not thick smoke. Not a fire yet. But the sharp chemical stink of burning plastic. He's trying to smoke us out, Tessa whispered. That broke something in me. I started kicking at the wall behind the bunks. Old cabins are not as solid as they look. This one had rot along the lower boards. Miles understood and joined me. We kicked and kicked while Tessa blew the emergency whistle in bursts that stabbed my ears. The door cracked wider behind us. A hand came through. Gloved. Grabbing. Miles hit it with the trekking pole. The hand vanished. We kicked until one board came loose. Then another. Snow poured through the gap. Miles went first, belly down, forcing himself through broken wood and ice. Tessa followed. I got stuck halfway, jacket snagged on a nail, and for 2 seconds I couldn't move. Behind me the bunk shifted. The door opened enough for a headlamp beam to slice across the floor. I ripped forward so hard the nail tore through my jacket and cut my side, but I didn't feel it until later. Outside was chaos. Wind. Snow. Dark trees. The smell of smoke. We ran downhill because downhill felt like a way. Tessa fell twice. Miles lost one glove. I kept hearing movement behind us, but I don't know if it was him or branches or my own pack slamming my back. After maybe 5 minutes, Tessa's phone caught one bar. She called 911. The call dropped twice. On the third try, she got enough out for the dispatcher to understand. 3 hikers, unknown cabin, Man trying to break in, storm, no exact location. The dispatcher told us to stay together and use the whistle. So we did. We huddled under a fallen tree for almost 2 hours, taking turns blowing the whistle until my lips went numb and Tessa's hands shook too badly to hold it. Search and rescue found us at 2:18 in the morning. The official report said the cabin was an unauthorized structure built on old logging land near the boundary of the national forest. Not on public maps, not maintained, not known to the ranger district, at least officially. They found signs that someone had been living there, food wrappers, cigarette butts, a sleeping bag hidden under floorboards, several printed trail permit forms sealed in plastic. Not just ours, other people's. Names, emergency contacts, routes. The man was never caught. Security footage from a gas station near the trailhead showed someone standing near Miles's truck less than an hour after we started hiking. Hood up, face turned away. The camera caught him looking through the windshield, maybe at the permit copy Miles had stupidly left on the dashboard. That was how they thought he got our names. As for the logbook, police took it. Tessa had kept it dry inside her coat. They confirmed the handwriting on our names didn't match any of ours, despite what I thought in the moment. Fear had made it look familiar. The sentence about midnight was written by the same person who had copied our names. The older note under the bunk, "Do not answer," had been there longer. Different ink, different paper. They couldn't say who wrote it. A deputy told me later that the most likely explanation was simple and ugly. Someone had been using that cabin to watch stranded hikers. Maybe rob them. Maybe worse. He used the logbook to scare people, control them, keep them confused. He probably waited until they were desperate enough to open the door. I asked how many people had opened it. The deputy didn't answer that. I still think about the cabin whenever storms hit my apartment windows. I think about how grateful we were when we saw that roof. How safety can have walls, blankets, a stove, even canned peaches on a shelf, and still be the most dangerous place you could have found. Miles doesn't hike anymore. Tessa still does, but never without a GPS beacon and never anywhere unofficial. Me, I have a habit now. Anytime I walk into a room I didn't expect to find, a motel room, a work closet, even a storage unit, I look for signs that someone was there right before me. Warm blankets, fresh ash, a name written where it shouldn't be. And I never, ever open the door just because the voice outside knows mine. Story 8. The photo was old and grainy, but it was him. Same narrow face. Same deep lines around the mouth. Same crooked left ear that stuck out from under his wool cap. Only the newspaper clipping said the man in the picture had died 15 years earlier. I was standing in a mountain lodge bathroom hallway, holding a laminated article about a climbing accident, while the man who had been guiding us all morning sat 20 feet away drinking coffee like he hadn't just become impossible. His name, at least the name he gave us, was Elias Brandt. I was 26 then, living in Denver and working front desk at a dental office. I wasn't outdoorsy in any serious way. I owned hiking boots because they were on sale. The trip wasn't even my idea. My boyfriend at the time, Nolan, had planned it with 2 of his co-workers, Priya and Sam, and I agreed because I was trying very hard to be the kind of girlfriend who didn't ruin things. That sounds pathetic now, but it's true. Nolan was charming in public and mean in private. Not all the time. That was the confusing part. He'd make me feel dramatic for being upset, then buy me breakfast and act like nothing happened. By the time that trip came around, I was exhausted from constantly deciding whether something counted as bad enough to leave. So when he said, "Come on, Mia, don't be boring," I went. The route was a 2-day traverse through a pass in the San Juan Mountains. Nothing insane, according to Nolan, but tricky enough in late season that he hired a local guide. Elias met us outside a supply store in Silverton just after sunrise. He was probably in his 50s, though mountain people can look any age between 40 and 70. Lean, quiet, weathered skin, gray beard trimmed short. His truck was old but clean, and his gear looked used in a way that made all our shiny rented stuff embarrassing. He didn't talk much at first. Just checked our packs, frowned at Nolan's jacket, and made Sam remove half the useless things he had brought. "You'll hate every ounce by noon," Elias said. Nolan laughed like they were buddies. Elias didn't laugh back. I liked him immediately. The morning started clear and cold. The trail climbed above tree line into a world of rock, yellow grass, and patches of old snow tucked into shadows. Elias moved slowly, but never seemed tired. He pointed out loose slopes, wind signs, places where the trail had washed out. He noticed everything. At one point, Priya slipped on shale, barely anything, and he turned before she even made a sound. "Shorter steps," he said. "Don't fight the mountain." Nolan rolled his eyes when Elias looked away. I saw it. Elias probably did too. By late morning, clouds were building west of us. Elias kept glancing that direction. We reached a small private lodge near the pass, really more of a seasonal outpost for guided groups. It was closed to overnight guests but open during the day for coffee, restrooms, and radio check-ins. Inside, it smelled like pine cleaner, wet wool, and burnt coffee. There were old climbing photos on the walls, maps under glass, and framed articles about rescues, avalanches, memorial hikes. I went to use the restroom. That was where I saw the clipping. It was on a corkboard beside a faded photo of 5 men in helmets and old climbing jackets. The headline said, "Local guide killed in Winter Pass accident." Below it was the picture. Elias Brandt, age 38, dead after falling during a rescue attempt. I stared at it so long that a woman came out of the restroom and asked if I was okay. I said yes, because apparently I lie automatically when scared. I read the article twice. Elias had been guiding a group through the same pass in early November. Weather shifted. One client broke an ankle. During the rescue, Elias fell into a ravine. His body was recovered 3 days later. Recovered. Not missing. Not presumed dead. Recovered. I took a photo of the clipping with my phone, then walked back into the main room with my legs feeling separate from the rest of me. Elias was sitting by the window, hands wrapped around a paper cup. Priya and Sam were arguing softly about whether the clouds looked bad. Nolan was buying jerky from a rack near the counter. I sat down beside Priya and whispered, "Look at this." She looked at the picture. Her expression drained. Sam saw it next. Then Nolan. Nolan's reaction was different. He smiled like he'd caught someone in a lie and was excited to use it. "What the hell?" he said too loudly. Elias looked over. Nolan walked straight to him with my phone in his hand. "Dude," he said, "is this supposed to be funny?" Elias looked at the screen. For a moment, nothing moved in his face. Then he handed the phone back and said, "We leave in 10. That scared me more than denial would have. Nolan laughed. No, we're not just moving past that." Elias stood. "Weather's closing. Are you him?" The lodge went quiet enough that I heard the coffee machine click. Elias looked toward the west-facing windows. The clouds had thickened, dark underneath. "We leave now," he said, "or we turn around and lose the crossing." Nolan stepped closer. "Answer the question." Elias's eyes shifted to me for half a second. Not pleading, not threatening, just tired. Then he said, "My brother." "What?" "My brother died. I use his permit business. Same last name. People remember him. It gets me work." It was a terrible explanation, but it was human. Greedy maybe. Sad maybe. Not impossible. The woman behind the counter, who had been listening, looked down fast when Elias said it. That was the first sign the locals knew more than they were saying. Nolan wanted to cancel. Not because he was scared, I don't think. Because he wanted control back. Priya said the storm looked real, and we should listen to the guide, whoever he was. Sam agreed with Priya. I said nothing until Nolan looked at me. "Well," he said, for people stared at me. I hated him in that moment for making me choose in front of everyone. "I think we should get down," I said. Elias nodded once. We left 5 minutes later. The trail beyond the lodge narrowed and cut across a slope of broken rock. The wind had teeth now. It pushed at our packs and threw little pellets of snow against our cheeks. Elias kept us close together. Nobody talked except when he gave instructions. "Stay left. Watch the ice. Do not step on the darker snow." After another hour, the trail disappeared under drift. Elias didn't hesitate. He angled us toward a line of cairns almost invisible against the rocks. He knew exactly where they were. Too exactly, I thought. Nolan kept muttering behind me, "Brother, my ass." I told him to stop. He said, "Don't start." Elias heard. I know he did because his shoulders tightened, but he didn't turn around. Around 2 p.m., Sam's boot punched through a crusted patch near a stream crossing, and he twisted his knee badly. Not broken, but bad enough that he couldn't put full weight on it. Priya knelt beside him. She was calm, asking pain level, checking swelling. Snow thickened around us. Elias scanned the slope. "We shelter below the ridge," he said. "Then radio out." Nolan snapped. "No, we're not following you anywhere until you tell us who you are." Elias stepped close to him. Not aggressive. Just close enough that Nolan shut up. "You can be angry when we are below wind line," he said. "Right now you walk." The next 30 minutes were miserable. Sam leaned on Elias and Priya. I carried part of Sam's pack. Nolan stayed behind us, angry and quiet, which somehow felt worse than when he talked. Then Elias led us off the marked route. I saw it clearly. The last cairn was to our right. He took us left, down into a rocky cut between slopes. "Trail's there," Nolan shouted. "Cornice above it," Elias said. "You expect us to trust you?" "No," Elias said. "I expect you to survive." We went left. 10 minutes later, we heard the mountain collapse behind us. It wasn't a huge avalanche like videos online. It was a heavy sliding roar, snow and rock breaking loose over the section where the trail had been. The sound rolled through the pass and left silence after it so complete that nobody breathed. Nolan's face went white. Elias didn't say "I told you so." That made me trust him more, and somehow fear him more too. We reached a depression under a shelf of rock where the wind dropped enough to hear ourselves think. Elias pulled out a radio and tried calling the lodge. Static. He adjusted the antenna and tried again. Nothing. Then he told us we would wait 30 minutes for visibility and move to an old service route. "What service route?" Priya asked. "Mining Road." "It's on the map?" "No." Nolan laughed once, sharp and ugly. "Of course it isn't." Elias looked at him for a long moment. "You want the map route? It's buried." That shut him up. While we waited, I pulled the photo up again on my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The dead Elias in the clipping had a small scar over his right eyebrow. Our Elias had the same scar. I hadn't noticed until then because his cap covered part of it, but now, sitting 6 feet away from him under that rock shelf, I saw it. Same scar. Same ear. Same eyes. Not brother. Same man. I showed Priya without speaking. She looked, then looked at him, and her mouth tightened. Elias saw us. He sighed. "I didn't die," he said quietly. Nolan's head jerked up. Elias kept his eyes on the storm. "They pulled out a body. It was not mine." No one spoke. "Whose body?" Sam asked. Elias rubbed his hands together, slow. "A client." That was when the fear changed shape. Before that, it had been weird. Creepy. Maybe dishonest. Now it was something else. Priya said, "You let them think it was you?" I was not thinking clearly. "For 15 years? His face hardened. "You want the whole story now, in a storm, with his knee swelling and the pass closing?" "Yes," Nolan said. Elias ignored him and looked at Priya. A man died because he would not listen. Another man died, trying to bring him back. I survived. I should not have. He pointed downslope. "The old road is 20 minutes. We go now." Nolan stood too fast. "I'm not going with him." The wind rushed over us. "Nolan," I said. "No. This is insane. He faked his death. He's taking us off trail." Elias said, "The old road leads to a maintenance shed with a landline. You said radio. Radio failed. So now there's a magic phone?" Elias turned away. "Stay if you want." Nolan grabbed my arm. Hard. "You're coming with me." I looked down at his hand on my sleeve, and something in me finally snapped into place. Not loudly, not bravely, just clearly. "No," I said. His eyes changed. For a second, the mountain and the dead guide and the storm all disappeared, and it was just the same apartment fights, the same car rides, the same careful tone I used to keep him from getting mad. He said, "Don't embarrass me." I pulled my arm free. Elias saw the whole thing. He didn't comment. He just handed me Sam's extra pull. We followed Elias. Nolan came too, but only because being left alone scared him more than being wrong. The old road was barely a road. A shelf cut into the mountain, half collapsed, covered in snow and loose rock. Elias moved first, testing each step. Sam limped behind him. Priya stayed close. I kept glancing back at Nolan, who walked with his jaw clenched and his hood pulled low. Then the storm opened for maybe 10 seconds. Just 10. Through a gap in the snow, I saw a dark rectangle below us. The maintenance shed. Relief hit so hard I almost stumbled. That was when Nolan slipped. He was behind me. I heard the scrape, then his sharp inhale. I turned and saw him sliding on his side toward the edge of the road. He clawed at snow, grabbed a rock, lost it. I screamed. Elias moved faster than I thought an older man could move. He dropped flat and caught Nolan's backpack strap just before he went over. Priya grabbed Elias's belt. I grabbed Priya. Sam braced himself against the slope with his bad leg and yelled in pain. For a few seconds, we were all one chain of terrified people. Nolan dangled halfway over the drop, boots kicking loose snow into white air. "Help me," he screamed. Elias held him. His face was inches from Nolan's. Calm. Strained. Human. "Stop fighting," Elias said. Nolan stopped. We pulled him back. No one spoke after that. At the shed, Elias broke a rusted lock with a rock. Inside were old tools, mouse droppings, emergency blankets, and a wall phone in a cracked plastic case. Somehow it worked. Barely, but enough. Priya called 911. Search and rescue reached us after dark with snowmobiles from a lower access road. Sam went to the hospital for his knee. Nolan had bruised ribs and frostbite on 2 fingertips. I had a cut on my palm I didn't remember getting. Police interviewed all of us separately. Elias was arrested that night, though not for hurting us. His real name was Daniel Brandt. Elias had been his older brother, the guide who died 15 years earlier. The newspaper had printed the wrong photo back then, using Daniel's image by mistake because the brothers had worked together and looked similar. Daniel, who survived the accident, disappeared afterward. Years later, he came back using Elias's name and credentials. The official report said he had been operating illegally as a guide, using expired permits and false identification. It also said his route decisions likely saved our lives. That sentence bothered me for months. Likely saved our lives. Nolan tried to turn the whole thing into a story about how he knew something was wrong from the start. He told people the guide was dangerous, that we were lucky to escape him. He left out the part where Daniel pulled him back from the edge. I broke up with Nolan 2 weeks later. Not because of the mountain exactly. Because on that mountain, I saw the difference between a dangerous secret and a dangerous person. Daniel lied about who he was. That's not small. I won't pretend it is. He used a dead man's name because he couldn't live with his own. But when the storm came down and the trail disappeared, he didn't abandon us. He didn't punish us for doubting him. He kept walking us towards safety while we were afraid of him. Nolan told the truth about his name and lied about everything else. Sometimes I search Daniel Brandt online. There isn't much. A short article about charges. A follow-up saying he received probation, a fine, and a lifetime ban from commercial guiding on federal land. No interviews. No explanation. The last thing he said to me was at the rescue staging area, before the deputy put him in a truck. I was wrapped in a blanket, shivering so hard my teeth clicked. He looked at me and said, "Don't let someone make you ignore bad weather." At the time, I thought he meant the mountain. Now I'm not so sure. I still hike, but I read every guide's name twice. I check permits. I tell someone my route. And whenever fog starts gathering in a pass, I don't argue with it. The mountain doesn't care who is right. It only cares who keeps moving before it's too late. Story 9. The voice on the radio knew about my ankle before I told anyone. That was the first thing I couldn't explain. Not our location. Not the storm. Rescue teams can know those things if they get enough reports. But my ankle? The way it had rolled under me on the descent, the swelling inside my boot, the fact that I was trying not to cry every time I put weight on it. No one knew that except Ben. And Ben had been asleep when the voice first came through. I was 31, working overnight security at a tech warehouse outside Boise. My whole life at that point felt like borrowed time. I slept during the day in a room with blackout curtains. I ate gas station food. I had just gone through a divorce that was friendly in the way a car accident can be friendly if nobody yells. Climbing was the only thing that made me feel like I was still a person. Ben was my cousin, but more like a brother. He was calmer than me, smarter with weather, better with knots, better at saying, "We're turning around," without making it sound like failure. We had planned a 2-day climb in the Sawtooths, nothing famous enough to attract crowds, but high enough to feel clean and empty. The first day was perfect. Cold blue sky, hard snow, wind light enough that we could hear ravens somewhere below the ridge. We moved well, made camp near a protected outcrop, and planned to descend the next morning before afternoon weather rolled in. The weather came early. By dawn, the sky was gone. Not cloudy. Gone. Everything beyond 20 feet was white static. Wind hammered the tent, so hard the fabric snapped against my face. Spindrift pushed under the edges and dusted our sleeping bags. Ben checked the barometer on his watch and said one word. Bad. We packed fast. Fast is relative in a storm. Every buckle takes longer with gloves. Every decision feels stupid 5 seconds after you make it. We started down around 7:40, roped together over a slope that had been firm the day before and now felt hollow in places. At 9:15 I slipped. It wasn't dramatic. My left boot punched through a crust, my ankle folded, and pain shot up my legs so clean and bright that I couldn't speak. Ben arrested my slide before it became serious. I kept saying I was okay, because saying otherwise would make the situation real. By noon, I wasn't okay. The storm erased our tracks. The GPS kept losing signal. Ben decided we needed to shelter high rather than risk descending blind into a cliff band. We found a shallow rock alcove, not enough to be comfortable, just enough to get out of the direct wind. That was where we waited. 2 grown men sitting shoulder to shoulder under a gray overhang, while snow swept past like sand. We had a satellite communicator, but the screen had cracked during my fall. It still turned on, then froze on the same half-loaded menu. Our radio was a small VHF unit Ben carried for emergencies. He tried calling the local rescue frequency every 15 minutes. Any station, 2 climbers requesting assistance near north approach to Coppeline Ridge. 1 injured, sheltering high. Do you copy? Static. Always static. By late afternoon, Ben was exhausted. He had been doing everything, checking my ankle, melting snow, adjusting our shelter, trying the radio, pretending he wasn't scared. I told him to sleep for 20 minutes while I watched the weather. He argued. I told him he was useless if he passed out. That worked. He closed his eyes, still sitting upright, radio clipped near his chest. I don't know how long he slept before the radio crackled. At first, I thought it was wind. Then a voice came through. Climbers on Coppeline, do you copy? I grabbed the radio so fast I almost dropped it. This is Coppeline Party, I said. We copy. We need assistance. Static hissed. The voice returned, weak but clear enough. 2 climbers. 1 ankle injury. You are above the drainage. Confirm. My mouth went dry. Confirmed, I said. Who is this? Rescue relay. What agency? Static. Then, weather blocking up a route. You need to descend. Ben's eyes opened. He had heard the last part. I pressed the button. Negative. Visibility is almost 0. We were advised to shelter if pinned. There was a pause. Storm worsens after dark, the voice said. Descend now. Follow drainage below your position. Ben sat up fully and reached for the radio. Ask call sign, he whispered. I did. The answer came broken. Unit 7 relay below. Ben frowned. Which drainage? He asked into the radio. The one below you, the voice said. Ben looked at me. That was not an answer. The radio went quiet. For a few seconds, hope and fear fought inside me so hard I felt sick. A real rescuer might have bad transmission. A relay might not hear every question. Mountains bend radio signals. Storms do weird things. I knew that. But the voice knew about my ankle. Ben tried again. Unit 7 relay. Provide coordinates or landmark confirmation. Static. Then the voice said, you have a blue tent fly. Orange rope. Injured climber has black pack. All true. Ben and I stared at each other. Our tent fly was strapped outside my pack. The rope was orange. My pack was black. Someone could see us. Or had seen us earlier. Ben stood and looked down into the storm. There was nothing visible below, just white movement and dark hints of rock. Maybe rescue is below us, I said. Ben didn't answer. The voice came again. You are too high. Descend now. There was something wrong with the calmness of it. Not robotic. Not evil. Just too steady, like someone reading instructions from a card. Ben took the radio. "We are staying put until you identify agency and route safety." The reply was immediate. "If you stay, you die up there." I felt those words in my teeth. Ben lowered the radio. "No professional says that," he said, "but fear is persuasive, especially when your boot feels like it's full of broken glass and daylight is starting to fade." We argued for 10 minutes. Not loudly. We didn't have energy for loud. I wanted to descend because someone knew where we were, and every minute sitting there felt like surrender. Ben wanted to wait because the route below us was unknown, and the voice wouldn't answer direct questions. Then we heard another transmission. This one wasn't to us. "Tell them lower," a second voice said. It was faint, almost buried under static. Then the first voice snapped, "Stay off channel." Ben's expression changed. He pressed transmit. "Who else is there?" Silence. "Who else is on this frequency?" The first voice came back, less calm now. "Descend immediately." Ben turned the radio volume down and leaned close to me. "There's someone else below. Not rescue." The thought settled between us like a third person. We had passed 2 men at the trailhead the day before. I remembered them because one had been sitting on the tailgate of a white pickup, smoking, watching us pack. They didn't look threatening, just rough, tired. One asked Ben which route we were taking. Ben gave a vague answer. The man smiled and said, "Weather's coming." At the time, it felt like normal trailhead talk. Now I couldn't stop seeing that smile. Ben decided we would not descend into the drainage. Instead, we would move sideways along the rock band to a marked emergency cache shown on his paper map. It was risky with my ankle, but the terrain was less steep than going down blind. If the cache was still there, it might have a stronger radio, flares, maybe even shelter. The voice kept calling while we packed. At first calm, then impatient, then personal. "Michael, listen carefully." I froze. "My name is Michael." I had not said it on the radio. Ben looked at me like he hoped I had. I shook my head. The voice continued. "Your cousin cannot carry you after dark. He is making a mistake." Ben switched the radio off. The sudden silence was worse. We moved. Every step was pain. Ben short-roped me across the slope, slow and careful. The wind pushed hard from the west. I used one pole and one ice axe, biting back sounds I didn't want him to hear. The world had shrunk to Ben's boots, the rope between us, and the next dark rock poking through snow. After 15 minutes, we heard the radio again. Not ours. A voice below us, faint through the storm. "Hey!" We stopped. "Hey! Up here!" The words came from somewhere under the rock band. Ben motioned for silence. A figure appeared below, maybe 30 yards down through the whiteout. "Doc jacket! Hood up!" One arm raised. "Rescue!" the person shouted. "Come down!" I almost answered. Ben covered my mouth with his glove. The figure moved sideways, trying to get a better angle. Another shape appeared behind him for half a second, then vanished in the blowing snow. 2 people. Ben whispered, "Keep moving." The man below shouted again. "You're going the wrong way." That confirmed it. Real rescuers don't hide a second person. They don't refuse agency ID. They don't lure injured climbers into a ravine while pretending to be a radio relay. We moved faster. My ankle screamed. I slipped twice. The second time, I hit my knee on rock and saw white spots in my vision. Ben hauled me upright and said, "Don't sit down." Behind us, the shouting stopped. That scared me more than the shouting. 10 minutes later, the radio in Ben's pack, which we thought was off, crackled to life again. The power knob must have been bumped. The voice was no longer calm. "You're leaving the route." Ben ripped the battery out and threw it into the snow. We reached the emergency cache near dusk. It was half buried beneath a metal marker pole, but it was there. Inside the orange box were 2 thermal blankets, expired ration bars, a flare, and an old hand-crank emergency radio sealed in plastic. Ben cranked it until his hand cramped. He transmitted our location on the rescue frequency, using the grid from the map and every landmark he could. No answer at first. Then, through static, a woman's voice responded. This voice was different immediately. Professional. Specific. Slightly strained. "This is Custer County Search and Rescue. Say again your grid coordinates." Ben closed his eyes like he was praying. We gave coordinates. We described my injury. We reported 2 unknown men below us using radio contact to impersonate rescue. The dispatcher's voice sharpened. Do not descend. Remain at the cache if safe. Keep visual signaling ready. I laughed once when she said that, not because it was funny, because those 3 words, do not descend, felt like someone had put the floor back under the world. The men found us before rescue did. I saw their headlamps first, bobbing below the ridge. Ben fired the flare. Red light filled the snow, turning the storm into something unreal. The 2 figures stopped. For 1 second, all 4 of us saw each other clearly. One of them was the smoker from the trailhead. He had a radio in his hand. The other carried what looked like a pry bar or tire iron. I'm not going to pretend I know what they planned to do. Rob us probably. Take gear. Maybe they thought we'd be too injured and cold to fight back. Maybe they had done something like it before. Ben shouted that rescue was on the way, and they had been reported. The smoker raised both hands like we were overreacting. Easy, he called. We were trying to help. Then the sound of a helicopter moved through the clouds. Distant at first, then louder. The men ran. Not toward us. Away, downslope into the drainage they had been trying to send us into. Search and rescue reached us 40 minutes later by ground team from a lower route. The helicopter couldn't land because of wind, but it circled long enough to scare the men off and guide rescuers toward us. I was taken to a hospital in Stanley. Bad sprain, torn ligaments, mild hypothermia. Ben had frostbite on 1 cheek and 2 fingers. Deputies found the white pickup at the trailhead 2 days later. Plates stolen. Inside were several handheld radios, bolt cutters, climbing gear with names scratched off, and 3 wallets that did not belong to either man. 1 suspect was arrested a week later after trying to pawn a GPS unit. The other, the smoker, was never found. The official incident explanation was that the men had likely monitored open radio frequencies near popular routes, listened for climbers in trouble, then used partial information to manipulate them. They knew our gear because they saw us at the trailhead. They knew our route because they followed far enough behind to watch us climb. They knew about my ankle because they probably saw me fall from below or heard Ben mention injury during failed calls. That explanation makes sense. Mostly. But there is one part one never told the deputy because I knew how it would sound. When the first voice said my name, Michael, I hadn't transmitted it. Ben hadn't either. Our permit was in the truck, locked in the glove box. Our names weren't written on our packs. Maybe the men searched the truck before following us. Maybe they heard Ben call me by name earlier, and I forgot. That's probably it. Probably. I still work nights, but I don't like radios anymore. At the warehouse, when one of the guards clips a walkie to his belt and static pops from the speaker, my body reacts before my mind does. My hands sweat. My ankle aches. I look for exits. Ben still climbs. He says fear is information, not a command. I understand what he means, but I also know information can be faked. A calm voice can lie. A person can sound helpful while leading you exactly where they want you. That's what stays with me. Not the storm. Not the injury. Not even the men below us. It's the memory of sitting in that rock alcove, exhausted and desperate, hearing a stranger say every true thing except the one that mattered. He knew where we were. He knew what we had. He knew I was hurt. And he still told us to go down. Story 10. I was 27, living in Flagstaff, Arizona, and working mornings at a bakery near campus. I wasn't making much, but it was the first time in my life I had my own place, my own bills, and nobody asking where I was going. My mom had died the year before after a long illness, and after months of hospitals and paperwork and relatives telling me to be strong, I had developed this habit of driving into the mountains after work just to sit somewhere quiet. That day, I drove toward a trailhead north of town after my shift. It was late October, cold enough for frost in the shade, but not winter yet. The aspens had mostly dropped their leaves, and the dirt road up to the trailhead was covered in yellow scraps that stuck to my tires. I had no big plan. Just a short hike, maybe 2 miles in, eat a sandwich, come back before dark. I was tired. That deep, old tired grief gives you, where even normal decisions feel like carrying furniture upstairs. The parking lot had 3 vehicles when I arrived: a Subaru with Colorado plates, a muddy Jeep, and an older dark green pickup parked near the far edge facing the exit road. I noticed the pickup because someone was sitting inside it, Engine off. Window cracked. A man in a gray beanie looking down at his phone. That was it. Normal enough. I put on my small backpack, locked my car, and started up the trail. The first hour was peaceful. Pine needles, cold air, that dry mountain smell like dust and sap. I passed a couple heading down with trekking poles and a dog wearing little orange booties. The woman smiled and said, "You've got maybe an hour of good light." I said, "That's all I need." At the time, I meant it. The trail climbed gradually to an overlook where you could see the dark folds of the forest and, beyond them, the pale edge of town. I sat on a flat rock, ate half my sandwich, and checked my phone. No service. I took a picture anyway because my mom used to ask for pictures from my hikes. For a second, I opened our old text thread out of habit. The last message from her was still there, sent from her hospital bed when she was too tired to talk. "Send me the trees." I stared at that until my throat hurt. Then I heard a man cough behind me. I turned. No one. The trail curved through pines about 30 yards back. Shadows were getting long. I told myself it was another hiker. Sound carries strangely up there. I packed my sandwich, wiped my hands on my jeans, and started down. About 10 minutes later, I found the ribbon. A strip of orange survey tape tied to a branch at eye level. That wasn't unusual by itself. Forest crews mark things all the time. But this ribbon looked new, bright against the gray bark, and I didn't remember passing it on the way up. Then I saw another one farther down. And another. They weren't marking the main trail. They led off to the right, down a narrow footpath I hadn't noticed before. I kept walking the real trail. A few minutes after that, I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped. They stopped. My heart began doing that slow, heavy thing where each beat feels too large. "Hello," I called. A squirrel shot across the trail ahead, making dry leaves explode under it. I actually laughed because the relief came so fast it made me dizzy. I started walking again. The footsteps started too. This time I didn't stop. I sped up, telling myself it was my own echo, my pack shifting, my boots crunching at a weird delay. Anything but a person matching my pace in the trees. Then my phone buzzed. One bar had appeared. A text came through from an unknown number. Wrong trail. I stopped so suddenly I almost fell. The number had a local area code. I stared at the message, then looked around at the empty trail. Another text arrived. Turn right at the tape. My hands went cold. I typed, "Who is this?" No reply. I called 911. The call failed. I called again while walking faster. Failed. Then a third text came. Getting dark. I wanted to run, but the trail was rocky and sloped, and my legs felt weak. I kept moving, one hand gripping my phone, the other holding my keys between my fingers, even though I knew that was stupid. At the next bend, the main trail was blocked. Not by nature. 3 logs had been dragged across it, stacked at waist height between 2 trees. Fresh scrape marks showed where they'd been pulled from the side. Orange tape fluttered from the top log. Beyond the blockage, the trail continued downhill toward the parking lot. To the right, the narrow side path opened between the trees, marked with tape. I stood there breathing hard. Whoever had done this wanted me off the trail. That thought made everything simple. I climbed over the logs. Halfway over, a man shouted from behind me, "Hey, wait!" I fell more than climbed down the other side and landed hard on my palms. Pain flared, but I got up and ran. Branches whipped my face. My lungs burned. Behind me, the logs shifted. Someone was climbing over them. I didn't look back. The trail dropped into a ravine where the light was already almost gone. I knew the parking lot was still maybe 15 minutes away if I kept moving. My phone flickered between one bar and none. I hit 911 again. This time it connected. "What is the location of your emergency?" I sobbed out the trail name, the forest road, the fact that someone was following me. The dispatcher asked if I could see the person. "No," I said. "I can hear him." As if to prove it, a voice behind me yelled, "Closer now. You're going to get hurt." The dispatcher told me to keep moving toward the parking lot if I knew the way, and not to engage. She asked what I was wearing. I told her. She asked if I had a flashlight. I said my phone. Then the call dropped. The trail forked. It should not have forked. I had hiked that trail enough to know there was no fork before the parking lot, but in the dim light, 2 paths cut through the trees. The left one was wider. The right one had orange tape. I went left. After 30 seconds, I realized the ground was wrong. Too soft. Too much brush. Not the maintained trail. I had taken some old wash or animal path. Behind me, footsteps crashed through leaves. I ducked behind a fallen ponderosa and turned off my phone screen. A man came down the false trail seconds later. I could see him through branches. Gray beanie. Dark jacket. Average build. Not a monster. Not some huge movie psycho. Just a normal-looking man breathing hard with a flashlight in one hand. The same man from the pickup. He stopped 10 feet from where I hid. His flashlight moved slowly across the trees. "Come on," he said, not loud. "You're making this worse." I pressed my fist against my mouth. He stood there listening. Then his phone rang. He answered in a whisper, but I heard enough. "No, she went left. I don't know, keep the road blocked." My whole body went numb. There was more than one. He moved past me down the false trail. I waited until his light faded, then crawled backward on my hands and knees, afraid even my jacket scraping bark would give me away. When I reached the real trail again, I didn't go toward the parking lot. If someone was blocking the road, my car was a trap. I went uphill. It felt insane. Every instinct screamed at me to go down, toward people, toward the road. But the dispatcher had my location. Maybe police were coming. Maybe not. What I knew for sure was that the men expected me to run downhill. So I climbed. 10 minutes later, I saw headlights through the trees below. Not police lights. Just headlights moving slowly up the forest road. Then another set. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "Don't make us come find you." I almost threw the phone. Instead, I turned the screen brightness all the way down and sent my sister my location pin. It spun for several seconds, then sent. I added, "Call police." Men following me. Trailhead north of Flag. Then I kept climbing until I reached the overlook where I'd eaten my sandwich. The sky was dark blue now. The town lights glowed far away. Wind moved through the pines in long, cold breaths. I crawled under a cluster of rocks near the edge and called 911 again. This time the call stayed connected. I whispered everything. The dispatcher told me officers and county deputies were on the forest road, but had trouble locating the correct trailhead because there were 2 access roads with similar names. She told me to stay hidden if I was safe. She stayed on the line. For 20 minutes, I listened to men search below me. I heard them calling fake friendly things. "Ma'am, you okay? We're trying to help." Once, one of them yelled my first name. I still don't know how they got it. Maybe from my car registration. Maybe my bakery apron was visible in the back seat with my name tag still pinned to it. Maybe they had been close enough behind me earlier to hear me answer a call. I hate that part. Then I saw flashlights on the trail below the overlook. 2 beams. Moving slowly. I curled into myself behind the rocks. The dispatcher was still whispering through my phone speaker, telling me not to move. 1 beam swept over the rocks and passed. Then came back. A man said, "There." I ran. There was nowhere smart to run, only away from the light. I scrambled along the ridge, slipping on loose gravel, branches tearing at my sleeves. Behind me, someone cursed. A flashlight bounced wildly. My phone flew out of my hand and hit a rock. I left it. I came out onto a service road I didn't know existed. And headlights hit me. For one awful second, I thought I had run straight to the men. Then blue and red lights flashed on. A deputy jumped out of his SUV with one hand raised. "Stop. Sheriff's office." I have never been so happy to be yelled at. I fell in the road. The men behind me turned and ran into the trees. One was caught that night near the trailhead. The other was arrested 2 days later after security footage from a gas station showed the green pickup buying fuel at 6:12 p.m., with both men visible inside. The official report said they were suspected in a string of thefts at remote trailheads. Usually they broke into cars after hikers left. But police found other things in the truck that made everyone stop using the word theft so confidently. Zip ties. 2 cheap prepaid phones. Women's jackets. Several driver's licenses that did not belong to them. Orange survey tape. A notebook with trailhead names and times. My number had come from a tag on my car's windshield from the bakery parking permit. It had my employee ID and phone number printed small at the bottom. I had never noticed. The man who followed me claimed they only wanted to scare me away from the parking lot so they could steal my car. The deputy who took my statement didn't say what he believed. He just looked tired and told me I was smart for going uphill. For weeks, I replayed that like praise, like proof I had done something right. But the truth is, I didn't feel smart. I felt hollow, lucky in a way that made me nauseous. I stopped hiking alone. I stopped putting stickers on my car that revealed anything about me. I changed my number, quit the bakery, moved apartments, and still checked my rearview mirror every time I drove into trees. The worst part isn't that a stranger followed me. It's that he did it in such a normal place, in daylight at first, with other cars parked nearby, and a couple with a dog passing only an hour before. That trail didn't look dangerous. The sky was pretty. The air smelled like pine. I had a sandwich in my backpack and an old text from my mom open on my phone. I used to think fear would announce itself clearly. A scream, a weapon, a face in the dark. But sometimes it's just orange tape on a branch you don't remember passing. A blocked trail, a patient truck, a message from someone close enough to know you chose the wrong way.